have to start this review by saying, somewhat ironically, this 13-inch iPad Air is now the biggest and heaviest iPad in Apple's lineup, which is an odd thing to say about the Air because obviously the new Pro is the slimmest one they've ever made, and the standard 10th generation iPad obviously has a smaller screen, and the iPad mini speaks for itself. So yeah, there we go. And I think it's definitely fair to say that the M4 iPad Pro stole a lot of the limelight this year with all of its new glitz and glam, and this new M2 iPad Air just got relegated to being a bit of a spec bump. But there's actually a bunch of new stuff in here which I think is really worth talking about. This iPad is pretty much 80 to 85% of what the iPad Pro is, and I think for a lot of people out there who are considering getting an iPad, this should be a serious contender. And in this review, I'm going to break it down into 3 parts. I'm going to talk about all the really good stuff of this new iPad, all the stuff which is a bit and then all the stuff which isn't so good. So let's get right into it. Okay, let's start with the good things, and one of the obvious best new things is the fact that this comes in a larger screen size. It now comes in the 13-inch, and that's a really good thing. Beforehand, you'd have to go for a Pro if you wanted a larger iPad, and now you can get that with the Air models. And having that bigger screen makes iPadOS a little bit easier to use in my opinion. When you're using things like Stage Manager and having multiple windows open, that 13-inch screen size really does make it a lot nicer to use. And because it is still really light and thin, it's not really an issue taking this around with you all day if you want to. It is worth keeping in mind though, on the 13-inch model the screen is 12.9 inches, and on the 11-inch model the screen is actually 10.9 inches. So the screens are a little bit less and the bezels are a little bit bigger than what you'd get on the Pro models. The next really good thing is these now start at 128 gigabytes of storage, which is fantastic and long overdue. It was painful when the older iPad Airs started at 64 gig, and I would actually say that 128 gigabytes for an iPad experience is perfectly serviceable. There's so much stuff done in the cloud now, and it leaves you plenty of space to download apps and all the things like that. Obviously, if you're going to be playing tons and tons of games, then 128 gig might not be quite enough, but for the average user, the 128 gig starting point is going to be a really good option. Another good huge new update as well for the Air models is jumping to the Apple M2 chip as well. And this is great, but I sound like I'm repeating myself here. iPads haven't been slow in a really long time, and the difference between this M2 chip and the M1 chip and even the M4 chip is pretty minimal when you're doing day-to-day stuff. I have noticed a tiny bit of difference when exporting videos from this M2 compared to my M4. The M4 is faster, but it's not a huge night and day difference. This M2 chip is crazy powerful, and for any gaming that you want to do and for any kind of day-to-day tasks, it's going to be absolutely fantastic. And one of the things that I do really like about this iPad Air is there's no hidden stuff with the M2 chip. Doesn't matter which one you get, you're getting the fully fledged M2 chip with no binning, and you get 8 gigabytes of RAM across the system as well. There's no difference in RAM or difference in power or anything like that. Whatever iPad Air you get, regardless of how much you spend on it, you're going to get exactly the same internals, which is good. This time round as well with the iPad Air, we're getting the landscape camera, so it's now on the top of the iPad where it should be, and that makes things like video calls and everything like that much easier. You're also getting center stage as well, which is kind of useful. I generally sit down when I take video calls, but if you're standing around and moving around, that's useful too. The other really good new thing of this iPad Air as well is that it supports the new Apple Pencil Pro, which I actually didn't think it would when it was all announced, but that's really nice to see. The Apple Pencil Pro is the new pencil from Apple, and honestly I think it's the best thing that they've put out with this new iPad generation. That pencil includes a bunch of really interesting new features which is great for artists. One of them is barrel roll, which lets you rotate the pencil, and then the tip of the tool that you're using on the iPad will rotate with it, and it properly emulates a real tool. And it's also got this pinch function which feels like you're pressing a button, so when you squeeze the pencil it will come up with a bunch of little options for different tools and things like that, but it's also got a haptic feedback, so it actually feels like there's something going on in there. It's a really tactile experience and it's kind of hard to explain on camera, but this really does make the pencil feel so much better to use, and as a tool for the iPad it's almost borderline on the essential now, so that's a really good thing too. Also, thanks to that M2 chip as well, you're also getting Apple Pencil Hover. This was reserved for the Pros up until now, but this lets you see what you're going to do with the pencil before you put the pencil to the iPad, so you can preview stuff, and a bunch of apps use it in a bunch of different interesting ways, so that's really nice to see it come down to the iPad Air as well. And I have to shout out the new Smart Folio for the iPad here too. I mentioned this a little bit in my M4 iPad Pro review, But this smart folio update is actually really good. It gives you a bunch of new angles which you couldn't get before, which is really useful for like a number of tasks depending on what you're doing. I actually can't believe it's taken Apple this long to update those smart folios, but they're here and they're really nice, and they're also backwards compatible with the older iPad Airs as well. So if you need a new smart folio case, this is a great time to get one. Talking of colors too, I actually really like the range of the new iPad Air colors. Now, you shouldn't buy something based off a color. I'm potentially the worst person online for that, but I actually really like these. Anything pastel in my book is gonna get my vote. If you see my channel, you'll know that. We've got a purple, a blue, a starlight, and a space gray. And I actually like all of them a lot. I still think the purple is my favorite, but the blue is a close second. And these look really nice. The other really good thing as well, which is worth mentioning, which hasn't been covered too much, is these new iPads, including this iPad Air, has pushed down the price of the standard iPad 10th generation. And I really liked that iPad. I'll link my review up here if you want to see it. But that now starts at £350 here in the UK, and that's a really decent iPad. So that was a nice new feature of these iPads coming out as well. Oh, and if you do like the wallpapers in this video, I'll link them below. They're some of my own. Go and check them out. Okay, let's talk about all the things which are a bit And the first up is the screen is still 60 Hz. And look, I don't think Apple are ever going to jump the iPad Air or the iPad Mini up to 120 Hz. That's clearly a pro feature, and it makes it very clear what the differences are between them, because honestly, that is probably one of the main differences. It's the screen. And look, the thing is, you're probably going to notice this if you're coming from a previous Pro model or if you've got an iPhone with the 120 Hz refresh rate. But it doesn't actually last too long. I've been using this for the past few days when switching over from my Pro, and initially, yeah, I did notice it, but now using it, it feels completely normal, and even using the things like the pencil and stuff like that is fine. And obviously this screen is still an LCD one. It's a really good LCD one and it looks fantastic. But when you put it against the new iPad Pro with the double tandem OLED, you're going to notice the difference. And honestly, the difference is absolutely there. I'm pretty sure most people will be able to see it, but you have to kind of really put them next to each other to tell the difference. And I think for a lot of people, if you had both of these next to each other and then showed them the price difference, they'd probably go for the iPad Air screen, because this is still a really fantastic screen. I mean, it's an iPad. It is a screen, so it has to be good, and this one still is good. Obviously, it doesn't get as bright. This tops out at 600 nits, and the iPad Pro tops out at 1000 nits, so you have a harder time seeing this one outside, but it's still plenty bright enough for pretty much most situations. The next thing starts with a good thing, which is I actually think the entry-level pricing for the Air is really good. It's $599 here in the UK for the 11-inch model, and then $799 for the 13-inch model, and you're getting a huge amount of iPad for the money with that. The only problem is when you start adding on those accessories that things start getting really expensive. If you add the new Pencil Pro, which is £130 here in the UK, and then if you want to add the Magic Keyboard, which is £350, you're suddenly looking at an iPad which is costing over £1,000. And look, you don't have to go with Apple accessories. There's loads of other manufacturers out there which make really good alternatives, but I tend to find Apple to make the best ones. Alright, let's talk about the bad things now, and you'll be excited to know there's not too many bad things, but there's definitely some things which have to be mentioned. And the first up is this new iPad Air doesn't work with the new iPad Pro Magic Keyboard. That is very much a Pro only thing, and honestly I've tried putting the iPad Air onto the Pro keyboard and it doesn't even come close to sticking on, which is a bit of a shame. I get the idea of wanting to make sure the Pro model has all the Super Pro accessories, but we're getting the Pencil Pro on here and not getting access to that Keyboard Pro feels a little weird. It's not the end of the day though. Apple still make the Magic Keyboard and it's still a really good keyboard, but you know, it doesn't have all the nice things like the function row and the larger trackpad and the better key travel and all those sorts of things. Talking of the Magic Keyboard as well, I'm actually really surprised that the Magic Keyboard for the iPad Air and lower iPad Pro models didn't come down in price. It's actually exactly the same price as the brand new one, which is way better in so many ways. So not seeing that get a little bit of a price dip was surprising. You're basically paying exactly the same amount for a previous generation product, which is a shame. Secondly is also the new kind of Apple Pencil conundrum. I'm really happy that the new iPad Air uses the Apple Pencil Pro because I think it's the best update to the iPad, but it does now mean that it no longer supports the Apple Pencil Gen 2. And I think a lot of people coming up to this iPad might already have the Gen 2 Pencil, so you're going to have to get rid of this one to jump up to the Apple Pencil Pro, or you can use the Apple Pencil with USB-C, even though that doesn't have as many features. That's a bit of a tough pill to swallow. The reason the Apple Pencil Gen 2 doesn't work is because it no longer sits on the charger correctly, so it won't pair or connect. There's no way of getting this to pair any other way either. So you basically have to jump, there's no way around it. So there's all the good and the meh and the bad. And I wanted to basically touch on this iPad being pretty much everything that you could want from an iPad right now if you don't need those really kind of specific high-end features, because it doesn't matter how you slice this iPad, it's going to be £500 cheaper or $500 even when you start speccing up with a keyboard and things like that. And I don't think this is a £500 worse product. There's not a chance. This thing is really, really good. And if I was a consumer in the market and I wasn't making content all the time and I just wanted a really powerful iPad, I'm pretty certain this is exactly where I'd go. I'd probably get the purple model too. But who is this iPad actually for? And I'm going to kind of echo what I said in my M4 iPad Pro review. If you already have an M series iPad, whether that's an Air or a Pro, I don't think there's enough here to really warrant jumping up at this point. However, if you are in the market and you're looking for a brand new iPad, then there's actually never been a better time to jump in. The M4 Pro model is crazy powerful and crazy thin and light and does everything you could ever want it to. And this new M2 Air model pretty much does exactly the same in a cheaper body with like £500 slashed off no matter how you look at it. And that's a really, really good position for the Air to be in. Okay, last thing before I go as well, because I don't want to talk too much about this, but iPadOS is still iPadOS. Doesn't matter which iPad you're using right now, this still runs like an iPad and does everything that the iPad does. And we don't know if that's going to change. At this point, WWDC is around the corner. It could be like 2 weeks after this video is published, and there's pretty heavy rumors for some new iPad software stuff there, but we don't know that for certain. So I definitely think it's worth waiting at this point if you're thinking about upgrading or anything like that, to just see if Apple announce anything. Once again, don't buy a product on the promise of what it can be, buy the product on what it's doing today. Anyway, I think that wraps up all my thoughts on this iPad Air. I actually really, really love it. I think it's a great product, and what a fantastic place to jump in if you don't want to spend that money on the Pro models. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this review. If you did, pop a like. Let me know if you're picking up any of these new iPads in the comments below, and I will see you all in the next one.